Indiana judges are using a change in state law to keep kids sentenced as adults out of adult prisons.
The experiences of teen convicts in adult prisons paint a complex and often harrowing picture. From the moment they step into adult correctional facilities, these young individuals face challenges that are qualitatively different from their adult counterparts. This video delves into various facets of their life behind bars, from initial transition shock to the everyday struggles involving physical safety, mental health, peer dynamics, and interactions with prison staff, to the often limited access to education and rehabilitative services. The initial transition of shock and vulnerability. The initial transition of teen convicts into adult prisons is a jarring experience, one that usually exposes them to immediate physical and psychological vulnerabilities. Often, the very architecture of an adult prison is designed to intimidate. High walls, barbed wires, and heavily armed guards form the backdrop against which these young individuals must suddenly navigate life. From the get-go, their age and lack of prison experience mark them as vulnerable targets for exploitation, manipulation, and abuse. The immediate shock often starts with the intake process, a dehumanizing series of steps involving strip searches, issue of prison uniforms, and sometimes even solitary confinement as a form of orientation. Unlike juvenile detention centers, which may have more nurturing environments geared towards education and rehabilitation, adult prisons prioritize security and discipline. The newly arrived teen convicts are thrust into an environment structured around rules and punishments, not growth and development. The contrast between what they expected and what they encounter can be disorienting. Peer pressure, often immediate and oppressive, begins to shape their behavior. Older inmates may test new arrivals, assessing whether they can be intimidated or controlled. Young inmates often become entangled in power dynamics they barely understand. They may be forced to align themselves with certain groups or gangs for protection, thereby becoming part of a cycle of prison violence and retribution they cannot easily escape. The initial phase of incarceration often sets the tone for how these teen convicts will experience the rest of their time in prison. Early mistakes can result in long-term consequences. Their vulnerability extends beyond the threat from fellow inmates. Correctional staff, aware of their age and inexperience, may either be overly punitive, fearing that leniency may be taken as a sign of weakness, or dismissively lenient, not considering them as potentially serious as their adult counterparts. This imbalance in treatment by authorities can add another layer of complexity to their initial experience. Adding to this complexity are issues related to personal identity. Teen convicts are often still grappling with their sense of self, a process that becomes stunted and warped by the harsh realities of adult prison life. They must confront issues surrounding sexuality, religion, and race in a more contentious and sometimes dangerous environment than their peers on the outside. The scarcity of resources within prison, such as limited access to educational materials, counseling services, or even basic health care, exacerbates their initial struggles. Unlike in juvenile facilities, resources in adult prisons are generally allocated based on a hierarchy of inmate seniority and perceived toughness. Teen convicts often find themselves at the bottom of this pecking order. In short, the initial transition into adult prisons for teen convicts is fraught with challenges that go beyond simple acclimatization to a new environment. It is a period marked by intense vulnerability, and how they navigate this phase can significantly influence their overall prison experience. Physical safety concerns. The concern for physical safety becomes an ever-present reality for teen convicts entering adult prison facilities. While the general prison population faces its own set of risks, teenagers are at heightened vulnerability due to their age, lack of experience, and sometimes even their physical size. Adult inmates often recognize these vulnerabilities, which can lead to a higher likelihood of teen convicts being targeted for physical violence, sexual assault, and other forms of exploitation. Consequently, the physical safety of teen convicts becomes a complex issue that intertwines with numerous other aspects of prison life, from the social dynamics among inmates to the policies enforced by correctional staff. One of the first confrontations with physical danger often comes in the form of inmate-on-inmate violence. Fights can erupt over something as trivial as a perceived slight or as significant as gang affiliations. Sometimes, older inmates initiate conflicts to establish a pecking order, and in other cases, violence may be a rite of passage to earn respect or credibility within the prison hierarchy. The less experienced teens may not have the skills or the resolve to defend themselves, thus becoming more susceptible to harm. In worst-case scenarios, these skirmishes can escalate to life-threatening situations, involving weapons fashioned from everyday objects like toothbrushes or spoons to inflict serious harm. Teen convicts may also become victims of sexual violence. Adult prisons are known for high incidences of sexual abuse, and younger, less experienced inmates are often considered easy targets. Such experiences not only have immediate physical consequences, but also leave lasting psychological scars, undermining any prospect of healthy emotional development or future social integration. The fear of sexual assault can lead to a constant state of anxiety and alertness, draining mental resources and affecting other aspects of well-being. Limited access to healthcare further exacerbates physical safety concerns. Any injuries sustained through violence or accidents may not receive prompt or adequate medical attention, given the generally overstretched healthcare services in adult prisons. Such neglect can turn minor injuries into major health problems, adding another layer to the already complex issue of physical safety. The risks emanate from various quarters, be it fellow inmates, sometimes the very staff meant to protect them, or the environment they are confined in. These challenges are often amplified by the inmate's young age and lack of experience, making the subject of physical safety a pervasive and ever-present concern that permeates every aspect of their prison experience. Violence, and it is type. In the adult prison ecosystem, violence manifests in many forms, each with its own set of implications, particularly for teen convicts. Understanding the typology of violence is crucial, as each form requires different coping strategies and has varied effects on young inmates. At its most basic level, physical violence is an immediate concern, and it is often the most visible form of conflict within prison walls. This includes fights, assaults, and at times more organized forms of physical confrontation like riots. For teenagers, who are often less prepared to defend themselves and are more vulnerable targets, physical violence serves as a constant threat that can result in severe injuries or even death. Yet violence isn't always physical. Psychological violence is pervasive and can be equally, if not more, damaging. Emotional and mental manipulation, threats, and intimidation are some of the tools used by inmates to exert control. For young convicts, who are still developing emotionally and mentally, this form of violence can have particularly damaging long-term effects. It can undermine their self-esteem, escalate anxiety, and instigate mental health issues that could remain even after they are released. Sexual violence is another form that necessitates special attention. It includes not only acts of rape, but also sexual harassment, unwanted sexual advances, and coercion. The power dynamics involved in sexual violence are intricate, often involving not only the perpetrator and the victim, but also the larger inmate community and even correctional staff. For young inmates, this is an area of extreme vulnerability, as they might lack the knowledge or the emotional maturity to navigate the intricacies of prison sexual politics. Economic violence is less discussed, but is a common phenomenon. This involves the exploitation of inmates through control over resources, such as commissary items, food, or even access to better work assignments within the prison. Teenagers, who often lack the social capital or the understanding of the economic system within the prison, are often exploited in such arrangements. They may be forced to part with their food, personal items, or money as a form of protection tax, thus affecting not only their physical well-being but also creating a cycle of dependency and exploitation. Finally, state-sanctioned violence from correctional officers or the prison system itself poses its own set of challenges. This can include excessive use of force, use of restraints, or solitary confinement. While these measures are often justified as necessary for maintaining order and discipline, they can have severe physical and psychological effects on young inmates who may not fully understand the consequences of their actions. In a setting where violence is often normalized, understanding its varied forms is critical for analyzing the experiences of teen convicts. Each type of violence presents its own set of challenges, risks, and coping mechanisms. And for teenagers in adult prisons, navigating this complex landscape becomes a daily ordeal that deeply affects their physical and psychological well-being. Mental health, anxiety, and depression. Navigating the complexities of adult prison life is a daunting challenge for any individual, but for teen convicts, the stakes are extraordinarily high, not just for their physical well-being, but also for their mental health. Anxiety and depression are particularly prominent among this demographic. The high-stress environment, marked by the ever-present threat of violence and the harsh realities of confinement, create a fertile ground for the onset or exacerbation of mental health disorders. Anxiety in teen convicts often manifests as a heightened state of vigilance. This constant alertness can drain emotional resources, leaving them mentally exhausted and less able to cope with other challenges. They may develop phobias related to specific elements of prison life, whether it's fear of certain inmates or anxiety related to lockdowns and solitary confinement. Anxiety disorders can also manifest as panic attacks, obsessive-compulsive behavior, or generalized anxiety disorder. The coping mechanisms available to them are limited, often reduced to harmful behaviors like substance abuse or self-harm, as more therapeutic options are typically scarce in adult facilities. Depression is another pervasive issue. The loss of personal freedom, the monotony of prison life, and the separation from loved ones create a sense of hopelessness. This emotional downward spiral is particularly acute for teenagers who are at a critical stage of emotional and psychological development. The absence of positive reinforcement, lack of educational and recreational activities, and minimal opportunities for personal growth contribute to the persistence of depressive symptoms. The extreme cases may even result in suicidal ideation or attempts, an issue that is disconcertingly high among young inmates. Adding complexity to the issue is the lack of adequate mental health services in most adult prisons. Medical facilities are often understaffed and ill-equipped to deal with psychiatric disorders. The emphasis in adult facilities is more on maintaining discipline and less on rehabilitation or psychological well-being, which means that mental health often takes a back seat. The teenagers thus find themselves caught in a cycle where their mental health issues are both a cause and effect of various problems within the prison system, a cycle that is difficult to break without outside intervention. The mental health landscape for teen convicts in adult prisons is a grim one, characterized by a high prevalence of anxiety and depression, among other disorders. The conditions of confinement exacerbate these issues, and the lack of adequate mental health care further compounds the problem. As a result, many young inmates find themselves caught in a debilitating cycle, wherein their mental health challenges make it even more difficult for them to navigate the already perilous environment of adult prisons, leading to a degradation of both their current state and future prospects. Mental health and coping mechanisms. In an environment where formal mental health support is minimal at best, teen convicts in adult prisons often resort to various coping mechanisms to navigate the emotional and psychological turbulence they experience. These coping strategies are far from ideal, but they represent an attempt to manage stress, anxiety, and depression in an otherwise overwhelming setting. Some of the common methods include forming alliances, self-isolation, substance abuse, and engagement in artistic or intellectual activities. Forming alliances or friendships can serve as an emotional buffer. The companionship provides a sense of belonging, a reprieve from the constant threats and isolation that characterize prison life. However, these relationships are often fraught with complications. They may require commitments that involve participation in violent acts, or they may expose the teen to exploitation. Nevertheless, for some, the risks are outweighed by the immediate emotional relief that comes from having someone to confide in or rely upon for protection. Artistic or intellectual activities can also serve as coping mechanisms, although opportunities for such engagement are severely limited in adult prisons. Drawing, writing, or engaging in any form of creative expression allows emotional energy to be channeled in a less destructive way. Similarly, some inmates turn to reading as a form of escape, provided that they have access to books. For those who have the opportunity to participate in educational programs, these can offer not only a distraction but also a sense of accomplishment and hope for a better future. While these coping mechanisms vary in their effectiveness and long-term implications, they demonstrate a will to survive and adapt to an incredibly harsh environment. Unfortunately, these self-developed strategies are not substitutes for professional mental health care. They often serve merely as band-aids applied to deep emotional wounds that require much more intensive treatment, a resource that remains woefully inadequate in the adult prison system where most teen convicts find themselves. Dynamic social isolation. The dynamics of social interaction among inmates in adult prisons are complex, fraught with nuances that can have profound implications for a teenager's experience behind bars. One of the most daunting aspects of this experience is social isolation, a phenomenon that can take multiple forms and have severe consequences for young inmates. Unlike adults, who may have had previous encounters with the criminal justice system and therefore possess some understanding of the social rules that govern prison life, teenagers are often navigating these waters for the first time, making them particularly susceptible to social isolation. For many teen convicts, the initial experience of social isolation comes as a result of the ostracization they face from the adult inmate population. Given their age and lack of experience, they are often seen as outsiders, unfit to be part of the existing social structures. Adult inmates may view them as weak, easily exploitable, or simply as nuisances who disrupt the established order. This can result in exclusionary tactics that range from verbal harassment to more explicit forms of social isolation, such as being ignored or avoided during communal activities like mealtimes or recreational periods. The nature of confinement also contributes to social isolation. Restrictive policies, such as lockdowns or solitary confinement for disciplinary reasons, limit social interaction, making feelings of isolation more acute. These practices are detrimental to all inmates but can be particularly damaging for adolescents who are in a crucial phase of psychological and social development. Extended periods in isolation can lead to a variety of mental health issues, including heightened anxiety and depressive disorders. Moreover, the inability to form healthy peer relationships often has long-lasting effects that extend beyond the period of incarceration. Adolescents who experience severe social isolation during their formative years may find it challenging to engage in social activities or form meaningful relationships once released. This can lead to a cycle of reclusion and could contribute to recidivism, as they find it increasingly difficult to integrate into society. Dynamic gang affiliations. The lure of gang affiliations in prison is particularly compelling for teen convicts, presenting both an avenue for protection and a potential source of additional strife. For many young inmates, the complex social environment of adult prisons can be overwhelmingly intimidating. Joining a gang often appears to be a practical solution to some immediate problems, such as vulnerability to violence or social isolation. Yet, this choice comes with its own set of challenges and implications, making it a double-edged sword in the lives of these adolescents. Initially, gang membership may offer a sense of belonging that counteracts the feelings of isolation so prevalent among teens in adult facilities. The gang provides a ready-made social structure, complete with hierarchies and codes of conduct that offer a semblance of order in an otherwise chaotic environment. Additionally, being part of a gang generally includes some level of protection against violence from rival groups or isolated aggressors within the prison. This protection is especially appealing to teens who are already targeted for their age and perceived weakness. However, the protection and social structure come at a high cost. Gangs often require acts of violence or other illicit activities as rites of initiation or ongoing participation. For a young individual still in the formative stages of moral and ethical development, such experiences can be deeply corrupting. The acts committed as part of the gang can also lead to additional criminal charges and longer sentences, further affecting a teen's future prospects. Interaction with correctional staff. Power dynamics. The relationship between teen convicts and correctional staff in adult prisons is a critical aspect of the incarceration experience, defined largely by a power dynamic that places young inmates in positions of extreme vulnerability. Correctional staff wield considerable authority, an authority that can be used either to maintain a semblance of order and safety or to perpetuate cycles of abuse and neglect. For teenagers, who are still in the process of forming their understandings of authority, social structures, and their own identities, interactions with prison staff can be deeply impactful, affecting their behavior, self-perception, and mental health. One of the most immediate issues teens face is the lack of specialized training among correctional staff for managing youthful offenders in adult facilities. Unlike juvenile detention centers, where staff are trained to work with adolescents, adult prisons are not equipped to handle the unique needs and challenges presented by this age group. This gap in training often manifests as a harsher, more punitive approach toward younger inmates, informed by adult-oriented procedures and policies. As a result, teens are often subjected to disciplinary actions that are both physically and psychologically damaging, exacerbating the already traumatic experience of imprisonment. Sexual exploitation and abuse by correctional staff are also significant concerns. Teens, due to their age and lack of experience, are often targeted for sexual abuse or exploitation, crimes that are profoundly damaging both physically and psychologically. Even when not overtly abusive, the gender dynamics in a male-dominated system can be problematic, subjecting young inmates, particularly females, to a host of vulnerabilities, including harassment and intimidation. Access to education is a crucial factor that can significantly shape the experiences and future prospects of teen convicts in adult prisons. In a setting characterized by violence, social isolation, and unequal power dynamics, educational opportunities serve not just as a route to personal development, but also as a means of escape, albeit temporary, from the harsh realities of prison life. However, the availability and quality of educational programs in adult prisons often fall woefully short of meeting the unique needs of young inmates, a deficiency that has far-reaching consequences. Adult prisons are primarily designed with the objective of punitive containment rather than rehabilitation or education. Consequently, educational programs are often underfunded, understaffed, and lacking in curriculum that is relevant to the younger demographic. Even when programs are available, they are generally geared toward adult inmates, focusing on vocational training or GED preparation rather than comprehensive educational development. For teens who were already at an educational disadvantage prior to their incarceration, this gap in services only exacerbates their challenges. Many teens face multiple obstacles in accessing these already limited educational resources. High levels of violence and gang activity often make it difficult to maintain regular attendance at educational programs. Similarly, punitive measures like solitary confinement can disrupt educational progress. The precariousness of social status within the prison environment may also make some teens reluctant to engage in activities that could label them as vulnerable or ambitious out of fear of attracting negative attention or ridicule from peers or even staff. These factors combine to create an environment where education is not just deprioritized but actively hindered. Access to rehabilitative services are a critical component of any correctional system, aiming to prepare inmates for eventual reintegration into society. For teen convicts in adult prisons, however, access to such services is often severely limited, posing a significant obstacle to their personal development and future well-being. The lack of age-appropriate rehabilitative programs creates a vacuum that is frequently filled by the negative influences and harmful behaviors endemic to prison life, undermining the supposed goal of correction and setting these young inmates on a path toward chronic criminality. The limitations are both structural and resource-related. Adult prisons are often unequipped to provide the kind of intensive, specialized services that can address the unique developmental and psychological needs of adolescents. Whether it's drug rehabilitation, mental health counseling, or skills training, these services are generally geared toward an adult population and are ill-suited to the challenges faced by younger inmates. This mismatch leads to ineffective interventions that fail to tackle the root causes of the teen's criminal behavior, be it substance abuse, trauma, or lack of vocational skills. Even when rehabilitative services are available, teens face additional barriers to access. Stigma associated with participating in such programs can often deter them from taking part, for fear of being perceived as weak or vulnerable by their peers or by correctional staff. Furthermore, overcrowded conditions and long waiting lists can make it difficult for interested teens to actually join a program, even if they overcome social pressures to do so. The limited access to age-appropriate rehabilitative services significantly impairs the ability of teen convicts in adult prisons to break the cycle of criminal behavior and prepare for a productive life post-release. The lack of effective programming represents not just a missed opportunity for these youths, but a failure of the system as a whole. Investing in rehabilitative services tailored to the specific needs of adolescents is not merely a matter of ethical responsibility. It is also a practical necessity if the goal is to reduce recidivism and foster successful reintegration into society.